You spend a lifetime building relationships, thinking that family will always be a source of comfort, a place where you can rest your heart. But as the years pass, you start to see things more clearly. Not everyone in the family is a well-wisher. Some bring nothing but stress, guilt, and emotional exhaustion. And when you reach 60, you realize you don't have the time, energy, or patience to entertain such people anymore. This is the stage of life where peace matters more than obligation, where choosing yourself over toxic ties is not selfish, it's survival. I'm not saying to abandon family, but let's be honest. Some relatives drain you. They exhaust your mind, your emotions, your resources. They don't respect boundaries, they don't reciprocate kindness, and they don't bring any joy into your life. And if you've made it to 60 and still allow these people too much space in your world, maybe it's time to change that, because at this point, you've earned the right to live in peace. You've earned the right to protect your sanity. One of the first relatives you need to watch out for is the manipulator. This is the one who always has a plan, an angle, an agenda. They rarely call just to check in. They call when they need something. They know exactly how to twist words to make you feel responsible for their problems. Maybe it's a cousin who always needs money but never pays it back. Maybe it's a sibling who guilt trips you into doing things you don't want to do. Or maybe it's even one of your own children who uses emotional blackmail to get their way. Manipulators are dangerous because they play on your emotions. They know your soft spots, your fears, your insecurities. They know how to make you feel guilty for saying no. And the older you get, the more they'll try to use that against you. They'll say things like, "You're my elder, you should help me." Or, "If you don't do this, who will?" But remember this, being older does not mean you have to sacrifice your happiness for others. You are not an emotional punching bag. You are not a free ATM. And you are not obligated to entertain people who only see you as a resource. Then there's the drama magnet. This is the relative who thrives on chaos. They always have a problem, a feud, a crisis. If it's not a family fight, it's an issue at work, a problem with a neighbor, or some long-winded complaint about how life has been unfair to them. And somehow, they always try to drag you into it. They call you to vent, to gossip, to stir the pot. They want you to take sides, to get involved, to solve their mess. But here's the thing. When you get older, your energy becomes precious. You don't have the same patience for unnecessary stress. You don't have time to mediate petty fights or fix someone else's reckless mistakes. And you definitely don't need to be constantly reminded of negativity and conflict. Being around dramatic people will exhaust you. They will drain your emotional battery and leave you feeling irritated and tense. And at this stage in life, you should be seeking calm, not conflict. So, what do? You step back. You stop answering every dramatic phone call. You refuse to get pulled into fights that don't concern you. You let them handle their own problems instead of making them yours. It's not about being cold. It's about protecting your peace. Now, before we go further, let me say this. Avoiding toxic relatives doesn't mean you don't love your family. It doesn't mean you wish them harm. It simply means you are choosing not to let them disturb your peace. That is a choice you are allowed to make. That is a right you've earned. And that's just the beginning. There are still 4 more types of relatives you need to be wary of. Each one brings its own set of troubles, and the sooner you recognize them, the better. But for now, think about what I've said. Think about the manipulator. Think about the drama magnet. Ask yourself, have I been tolerating these people for too long? Have I been sacrificing my peace for the sake of keeping the family together? Because if the answer is yes, then maybe it's time to change that. As you grow older, your priorities shift. You no longer have the patience for nonsense, and you certainly don't have the energy to carry burdens that aren't yours. Life at 60 should be about peace, about ease, about enjoying what you've worked so hard for. But some relatives don't see it that way. They see you as someone to unload their problems onto, someone to drain, someone to take advantage of. And that's exactly why you need to be careful of the next two types of relatives: the emotional leech and the critic. Let's start with the emotional leech. This is the relative who never truly listens to you. They come to you only when they need to pour out their troubles, and they expect you to absorb it all like a sponge. Every conversation revolves around them, their pain, their struggles, their frustrations, and no matter how much advice you give, no matter how many times you try to help, nothing ever changes. You might recognize them as that one sibling who always seems to be suffering, always in distress, always expecting you to comfort them. Or maybe it's a distant cousin who never asks how you're doing, but always finds time to talk about their problems. They treat you like their personal therapist. But here's the harsh truth. They don't want solutions. They don't want growth. They just want a place to dump their negativity. And what happens when you listen to them for too long? You feel drained. You feel exhausted. You start carrying their emotions like a weight on your back, a weight that's not even yours to bear. This is what emotional leeches do. They suck the joy out of you and leave you feeling heavy. At 60, you don't need that. You don't need to be anyone's emotional trash can. You have your own emotions, your own challenges, and your own life to focus on. So what's the solution? Boundaries. When an emotional leech starts their usual cycle of complaints, don't indulge them. Change the subject. Keep the conversation light. And if they don't respect that, create distance. You are not responsible for fixing their problems. And you certainly don't have to sacrifice your peace for someone who refuses to help themselves. Now let's talk about the critic. Every family has one. This is the relative who always finds something wrong with you. They judge your choices, your lifestyle, your appearance, your past decisions. They act as if they know what's best for you, even when they have no real wisdom of their own. Maybe it's an aunt who constantly comments on your health, telling you what you should and shouldn't eat, criticizing your weight or making snide remarks about aging. Or maybe it's a sibling who undermines your achievements, acting as if you've never done enough. The critic always has a negative opinion, and they deliver it in a way that makes you feel small, unworthy, or guilty. At 60, you need to stop entertaining this nonsense. You have spent decades living, learning, making mistakes, and growing. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you live your life. You don't need to defend your choices, your habits, or your preferences. And you certainly don't need to take criticism from someone who has never walked in your shoes. The problem with critics is that they operate from their own insecurities. They project their fears, their regrets, and their disappointments onto others. If they criticize your appearance, it's because they're insecure about their own. If they mock your lifestyle, it's because they feel unfulfilled in theirs. But that's not your problem to fix. So what do? You stop reacting. When a critic makes a comment, don't engage, don't argue, don't defend, don't explain. Just smile, change the subject, or walk away. The less energy you give them, the weaker their words become. And eventually, they'll realize that you're no longer willing to be their target. The emotional leech and the critic. Two types of relatives that can make your life heavier, if you let them. But remember this, you have the power to decide who gets access to your energy. You have the power to protect your peace. And at this stage in life, that's exactly what you should be doing. There are still 2 more relatives to avoid. 2 more types of people who can disturb your peace if you're not careful. But for now, just take a moment to reflect. Have you been carrying emotional burdens that aren't yours? Have you allowed someone's criticism to shape how you feel about yourself? If so, it's time to let go. It's time to reclaim your space, your energy, and your joy. By the time you reach 60, you've seen enough of life to know what truly matters: peace, stability, and genuine relationships. You've also learned that not every family member has your best interests at heart. Some relatives take more than they give. Some hold you hostage with guilt and obligation. And if you're not careful, they will drain your happiness without a second thought. Today, we need to talk about 2 more types of relatives you should avoid: the entitled taker and the nostalgic clinger. Let's start with the entitled taker. You probably already know who this is. This is the relative who believes you owe them something simply because you're family. They take your kindness for granted. They expect favors without offering anything in return. And they treat your generosity as if it's their right rather than a privilege. Maybe it's that nephew who always borrows money but never pays it back. Or the distant cousin who only calls when they need something. Or worse, it might be one of your own children who has grown accustomed to leaning on you financially, emotionally, or physically without considering the toll it takes on you. Here's the hard truth. Entitlement has no place in a healthy relationship. Just because you are family doesn't mean you are a personal bank, a free babysitter, or a problem solver for people who refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. And the older you get, the more these entitled takers will try to exploit you, especially if you've spent years being generous with them. The worst part? They rarely show gratitude. They assume you'll always be there to fix things, to provide, to rescue them from their own poor choices. And if you ever say no, they act as if you've wronged them. They play the victim. They guilt-trip you. And they try to make you feel selfish for protecting your own resources. But here's what you need to understand. Saying no is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not wrong. You have spent decades working, sacrificing, and building your life. And now, in your later years, you deserve to enjoy the fruits of your labor without feeling obligated to rescue others. So how do you deal with entitled takers? You stop enabling them. If they ask for money, don't give it unless it's truly necessary. And even then, consider it a gift, not a loan. If they try to guilt-trip you, stand firm. If they expect you to solve their problems, remind them that they are adults, fully capable of handling their own lives. You are not responsible for carrying grown people on your back. And if someone only values you for what you can give, then maybe they don't deserve a place in your life. Now let's talk about the nostalgic clinger. This is the relative who refuses to accept that time changes people, relationships, and our circumstances. They live in the past, constantly reminding you of how things used to be, and pressuring you to maintain outdated family dynamics that no longer serve you. Maybe it's an old friend or cousin who refuses to acknowledge that you've changed, grown, or outgrown certain relationships. Or maybe it's a sibling who constantly brings up childhood rivalries, treating you as if you're still the same person you were decades ago. Or perhaps it's an aging parent who refuses to see you as an independent adult, always trying to control or influence your life based on their old-fashioned expectations. Nostalgic clingers are tricky because their intentions don't always seem harmful. They may not be toxic in an obvious way, but their inability to move forward can hold you back. They want you to fit into an outdated version of yourself, to maintain old traditions that no longer serve you, and to keep playing roles that you've long since outgrown. At 60, you should not feel obligated to stay stuck in the past. You have changed. Your priorities have changed. And if certain family traditions, roles, or expectations no longer align with your peace, you have every right to step away from them. The hardest part? Letting go of the guilt. Nostalgic clingers will often say things like, "But this is how. We've always done it," or "Family is supposed to stick together no matter what." But what they fail to realize is that real family respects who you are now, not just who you used to be. So how do you handle them? Set clear boundaries. If certain gatherings or traditions exhaust you, politely decline. If someone refuses to, accept your growth. Remind them, firmly but kindly, that you are not the same person you were 20 or 30 years ago. And if they continue to pull you back into old patterns, create distance. Life is short, and time is precious. At this stage in your life, you should be focusing on what brings you joy, not on fulfilling outdated expectations. So now, you have 4 types of relatives to be cautious of: the manipulator, the drama magnet, the emotional leech, and the critic. And now, we've added the entitled taker and the nostalgic clinger. Each of them, in their own way, can take from your peace, your energy, and your happiness if you let them. The question is, will you let them? Or will you finally choose yourself? But for now, take a moment. Reflect on these people in your life. Have you been sacrificing your peace for the sake of obligation? Have you been tolerating behavior that drains you? If so, maybe it's time for a change. By now, you've heard about the 6 types of relatives that can drain your energy after 60. The manipulator, the drama magnet, the emotional leech, the critic, the entitled taker, and the nostalgic clinger. Each of them, in their own way, can disturb your peace, take advantage of your kindness, and leave you feeling exhausted. But knowing who to avoid is only part of the equation. The real challenge? Learning how to finally let go without guilt, without second-guessing, and without feeling like you're doing something wrong, because that's what holds most people back. Not a lack of awareness, but a fear of what might happen if they walk away from toxic family dynamics. Let's be honest, family is complicated. Society teaches us that family is everything, that blood ties should never be broken, that we must endure each other no matter what. And for years, maybe even decades, you believed that. You tolerated mistreatment, you forgave without change, and you carried emotional burdens that were never yours to bear. But now you've reached a stage in life where peace matters more than appearances, where self-respect matters more than tradition, where being around the right people matters more than keeping toxic family bonds intact. So the real question is, how do you finally let go? How do you distance yourself from the relatives who drain you, manipulate you, or make you feel small without getting caught in guilt, obligation, or regret? It starts with one simple truth. You owe no one your suffering. Read that again. Let it sink in. Because for too long, you've been conditioned to believe that saying no is selfish, that setting boundaries makes you the bad guy, that choosing yourself means abandoning your responsibilities. But that's a lie. Saying no is not selfish. It's survival. Setting boundaries is not unkind. It's self-respect. And choosing yourself is not abandonment. It's liberation. Let's break this down. What are the steps to finally distancing yourself from these toxic family dynamics without guilt? First, you must accept that some relationships cannot be fixed. You've tried. You've explained yourself. You've been patient. You've given second, third, and fourth chances. And yet nothing has changed. Why? Because some people don't want to change. Some people thrive on drama. Some are addicted to taking. And some are incapable of seeing the damage they cause. That's not your fault. And it's not your responsibility to fix. The moment you stop trying to repair what was never whole to begin with, you set yourself free. Second, distance doesn't require a dramatic exit. You don't have to cut people off with an angry speech or a final confrontation. That often leads to more stress, more arguments, and more unnecessary conflict. Instead, start pulling back slowly. Reduce contact. Answer calls less frequently. Stop engaging in toxic conversations. Let the relationship fade naturally. If the person truly values you, they will notice the distance and try to meet you halfway. But if they don't, that's your answer right there. Third, redefine what family means to you. Blood may make you relatives, but it does not make you family. Real family consists of people who respect you, uplift you, and add joy to your life, not just people who share your DNA. So instead of clinging to toxic relationships out of obligation, start investing in the relationships that bring you peace. Maybe that means spending more time with friends who feel like family. Maybe that means deepening bonds with the few relatives who genuinely love and respect you. Maybe that means focusing on yourself for once, instead of trying to hold everyone else together. Whatever it is, prioritize peace over obligation. Choose quality over quantity when it comes to family relationships. And finally, stop waiting for validation. You don't need everyone to agree with your choices. Some relatives will call you selfish. Some will say you've changed. Some will gossip, judge, and try to pull you back into the same patterns you just escaped from. Let them. Because at the end of the day, you are the one who has to live with the consequences of your choices, not them. So ask yourself, when you wake up in the morning, do you want to feel free, light, at peace? Or do you want to continue carrying relationships that only bring stress and exhaustion? The choice is yours, because at 60, you don't have the time, energy, or patience to waste on the wrong people anymore. You've spent years putting others first. Now, it's your turn.